My name is Munira Mirza. I'm the Deputy Mayor for Education in London, and I'm delighted to be here this afternoon with Brett Wigdortz, who some of you will know is the founder and CEO of Teach First, one of the most interesting and innovative initiatives to come out of London in the last decade. And technology, eh? Okay, hopefully you'll be able to hear me now. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to. No.
You put it on your
Okay.
put it on your cup and just sort of.
Okay, I'll just speak into it like this. Everyone can hear me. Good. I'm delighted that I have the opportunity to interview Brett, who has done so much for education in London and in Britain generally. And I hope that in the conversation we'll have in the next hour, he'll share some of the secrets of his success and some lessons that can be learnt in Britain, in other developing countries and developed countries as well. To give you the context about London, something revolutionary has happened in the capital in the last 10 years. London used to have a reputation in Britain as being a place where teachers did not want to teach. It was seen as the place where schools had poor behavior, the quality of the teach force was variable, there were real challenges with educational disadvantage, with poverty, and London was really regarded as the lowest performing of all the regions in the UK. And in the space of about 10, 15 years, there has been a transformation. London is now the best performing region across the UK. It has a very high quality teaching workforce, and it has some of the best results and the best innovation, the best entrepreneurial head teachers in the capital. So something remarkable has happened in that time. And one of the factors, one of the secrets of this success is the initiative Teach First. And I think I shall start by asking Brett to just explain a little bit about what Teach First is for those of you who don't know it.
Sure. Can people hear me okay? Cool. Okay. So Teach First is a charity. We've been going 12 years now. And our charitable vision is to ensure no child's educational success is limited by their socioeconomic background, and to close the gap between children from low-income and high-income communities. The way we do it, and our sort of theory of change, is really the idea that there needs to be a whole movement of leaders who are focused on making this change happen. And the way we want to help build this movement of leaders is by recruiting the best, most talented people in British society to teach in low-income schools. They all get a full qualification. We partner with schools of education and other leadership training experts. And they are full-time teachers for the 2 years that they commit. In schools, first in London, now all over Britain, England and Wales. And then after the 2 years, they make a commitment to continue to focus on reducing these gaps throughout the rest of their careers. A majority of them stay in teaching, and I could talk more about that. Many of them go on and do other things. See one of our alumni in the back over there is in our first cohort who works for STIR, a charity that a number of our people work for. A lot of our people work in education all over the place, but the idea is that they're continuing to work to close the gap throughout their entire career. We're building a movement of leaders who will work in society to close this gap.
Can I ask Brett, you yourself are not a teacher, and you didn't have an education background. You're an American, so you turned up in Britain, and you said, I'm going to start this charity. What inspired you? What motivated you to do this?
So I'm now a British citizen, so I've gotten my dual citizenship now. When I started, I was a management consultant with McKinsey, and I had transferred to London to look at really banks, and I had done a lot of work on something that was called the war for talent. And back then, that was a big phrase where a lot of the clients I worked with were looking, how can they attract and keep the best talent? And this was something the biggest banks, the biggest companies were really focused on. After doing a number of those projects, I got on a project that was looking at how businesses could improve the quality of education in London. And the history of this study was that Prince Charles invited a number of business leaders to his one of his palaces at one point. and said, there's a real problem in London schools. What can be done to solve it? And there was a whole business roundtable about it. And the head of McKinsey at that point, Ian Davis, said, well, why don't we do a study to look at what businesses could do about that? So then I got on this project, and I looked around at London schools. And we focused just on London at that point. And as you've heard, at that point, 10 years ago, it was a very, very depressing situation. I remember a few things. We were looking at data, and we said, let's try to find a school in London with a majority of children from low-income communities that was doing better than the national average. And we could not find one school. So we struggled to find even one really great practice example in London 10 years ago. It was bad. And then we visited schools, and I remember going from schools, head teachers who said things like, well, look, if the Australians and the Canadians went home, we'd have to shut down because they had all these temporary staff who were filling things. And that was depressing. But then also visiting other schools where some of the head teachers just had so low expectations for their school. And I remember one school in particular where a head teacher said to me, my goal for this school is to keep the kids off the street and out of jail. When I asked, what do you want out of your kids to get out of this school? If you think about how awful that is to think a leader of a school saying something like, my goal for these kids is to keep them out of jail. So I think many schools had very low expectations also of the kids. So what we did was we took that, and then we also took the idea of leadership, that basically top graduates, the sort of people who should get into any system, what they're looking for is leadership opportunities, as well as the businesses that we were partnering with, were sort of sold themselves as experts in leadership. And sort of took those three things together, and I wrote a business plan for Teach First. And then after writing the business plan, I took a 6-month unpaid leave of absence to try to see if I could develop the business plan and pass it on to someone else who is British or had a lot of educational experience. And then after a few months, I think I just got really excited about it. It got, it got in my blood and everything. And after 6 months, I thought, there's nothing I could do in my life more exciting than this. So then I resigned from McKinsey and started as CEO 12 years ago.
So wow, you took an incredible risk. You took unpaid leave, you left McKinsey, a very good job, and decided to do this thing which nobody else had thought of and nobody else was doing. And now an incredible success. So you've obviously, you've shown that there's something about that entrepreneurial spirit that you can actually achieve a huge amount. Obviously Teach First is innovative in Britain, but now you're trying to take the seeds of that to other countries. Tell us a little bit about the network, the international network that Teach First set up.
So it's really exciting. So there's a program, Teach for America, which has been going about 20 years, which has a lot in common with Teach First. And about 6 years ago, we were approached by, I was approached by some entrepreneurs from Australia, from Germany, from Latvia and Estonia, and Israel, and a few other countries who wanted to start similar programs. They had heard about Teach First, and they wanted to know how could you start similar programs in their own country. And so I was giving advice, but thinking, this isn't our core job at Teach First. And then I spoke to Wendy Kopp, who is the Chief Executive of Teach for America, who I think is also here. And she had been approached by entrepreneurs from Latin America and a few other places. And India had approached her. And so we decided to work together, and we got McKinsey again, did some pro bono work for us, and we started this network called Teach for All, which has now been going about 6 years. It has 30 members of it all over the world, and I think it's a similar model. So it's sort of like a OECD or a European Union or a Gulf GCC, where the idea is it's a network of independent programs. Each program has its own entrepreneur. So often people approach me and say, why don't Teach for All start a program in a certain country? And I'm always saying, that's not our job, actually. It needs to be a local entrepreneur who starts the program in their own country, who wants to get their own graduates, their own talent involved in doing it in their own country. And then Teach for All will provide support and help, and like an OECD or something like that, share best practices and ensure we're all learning from each other. So, just this past week, I was in Nepal and Bangladesh. And when we started Teach First, or started Teach for All, we never would have, I always assumed this program would work much better in more developed countries. But what's exciting is there's a great entrepreneur in India, Shaheen Mistry, who started Teach for India, who's doing fantastic work in Mumbai and Pune and Delhi. And she's gotten a number of other entrepreneurs excited from similar countries. So I was just in Nepal, where they have some of the best talent in Nepal joining. I was in Bangladesh, where their first cohort, almost all of them have studied in overseas universities and are coming back to Bangladesh to teach in schools where they have over 100 children in their classroom, amazingly overcrowded classrooms, and doing, I was saying before, they're doing amazing, I saw a fantastic class with 106 children in it, where the teacher was differentiating brilliantly in ways that I'd love for our teachers to do in England. So it's exciting to see how this model is working in lots of different countries.
One of the incredible statistics about Teach First is that it's the largest employer of graduates now in the UK. So having gone from a position where teaching was not seen as an attractive profession in the UK, where Oxbridge graduates were leaving university and going into banking or law or medicine and not considering teaching as a real serious career, it's now become one of the most popular career choices as a result of Teach First and the expectation, the aspiration that's associated now with teaching. But it wasn't always like that. So at the beginning, you would have had a very different context. Can you tell us a little bit, for those people who are interested in taking some of the lessons to their own countries, what were some of the early challenges you faced?
Yeah, so recently the Dean of the Institute of Education in London, which is one of the top schools of education in the UK, he gave a speech where he said he felt Teach First had detoxified teaching in the capital. And when I started, I met with the head of career services at one of the top universities in England, a university you've all heard of, which I won't mention. And that person said to me, look, last year there were about 7 or 8 of our graduates who went off to teach in a low-income school. And almost all of them ended up wanting to become priests or did it for some religious reason. He goes, maybe you'll be able to get 10 people from our university to teach in a low-income school, but not more than that. And today, of course, Teach First, we're the top graduate from the top employer from that university. We have over 10% of their graduates, 10% rather than 10 applying. And in all the top universities in England, the Russell Group universities, we have about 6% of final year students applying. And this year, we were as you said, the largest graduate recruiter in the United Kingdom. So I think what's exciting is really talented people, actually they do want to teach. All over the world when I go to other programs, the problems they're having are often problems to do with government or funding or other things. Very rarely is the problem getting the most talented graduates excited about something like this, which I think is very counterintuitive. People think top graduates have better opportunities out there. I think what we've shown is they don't have better opportunities, actually. Teaching in a low-income school is the best opportunity a top graduate can have. There's nothing better they can do with their time. And I think all over the world, countries are seeing this. So I think there's just no reason why the best talent in any country shouldn't be focused on teaching in low-income schools.
Well, how would you, in a couple of lines, if that's possible, summarize the impact of Teach First in London, and then maybe more generally in the UK? But what do you think has been the most important shift that it's created?
Yeah, so I mean, it's, as you said, like London, it's so exciting, I think, to be part of the change in London. There's so many stats about London. I mean, my favorite statistic I've heard in London this past month was for the first time, a child on free school meals in London, so a child from a very low-income community in London, now is doing better than the national average for all children. Okay, so in essence, London has in some ways closed the gap nationally. So it's better to be a poor child in London than to be a non-poor child living outside London educationally. And I think,
which is an incredible thing.
I mean,
even
incredible, yeah.
I mean, in that sense, London is unusual amongst capital cities in the world, because in most capital cities, the educational outcomes are poorer than in the rest of the country. Yeah. So London wasn't different in that sense 10 years ago, but now something's happened to reverse that. Yeah, I mean, it really is. And I know, obviously, you guys are looking at it, and so many other organizations are looking at what is this that's changed. I mean, just to put it also in perspective, 10 years ago, just to show you should never trust management consultants, 10 years ago, my colleagues and I at McKinsey, we wrote a report that said why London underperforms the rest of the country. And basically what this paper said is London will probably underperform the rest of the country for a long time for all these reasons. It has a lot more poor kids than the rest of the country. It's a very expensive city, so it's hard to get teachers to work there because it's too expensive for it. There's a lot more movement, kids move around a lot more immigrants, a lot more private schooling, so like a lot of wealthy kids are shuttled off to private schools. So all these reasons people thought London would do worse than the rest of the country, but now London is actually doing better than the rest of the country. So I think there's I think London Challenge, there was a great
government initiative about 10 years that Tony Blair started, which got schools to talk to each other a lot more. And what we see around the world, what I've seen all over the place in the best systems, is it's about communicating, about working together. It's about schools and everyone constantly supporting each other and mentoring each other, so no one gets lost through the cracks. I think in the last 10 years, there's been these amazing new head teachers. We were talking about Vanessa Ogden, who is one great head teacher. But literally, there's dozens of fantastic head teachers who I think are among the best leaders of any organization I've ever met in my life, who are strong ethos leaders in London.
They could run FTSE 100 companies.
Could,
they're serious CEOs of multi-million pound operations sometimes.
And I always think that is something, I don't know if people talk enough about it. I do think there's a group of maybe 10 or 20 of these head teachers who came in about 8 or 9 years ago, and they just started doing amazing things with their schools, and then they did a great job mentoring other schools, and it sort of raised everything. So that was great. And then, I do think the role we've had to play is we've started by providing the foot soldiers to all this change. So, we provide a huge percentage of new teachers in London. We only place in schools where a majority of the kids come from low-income communities, and in those schools in London where a majority of the kids come from low-income communities, this year we're more than a third of new teachers. And because we've been going for 10 years, we're 10% of all teachers. So all teachers in low-income London schools, we're 10% of those teachers in this year. So we're a large group. We have a lot of heads of department and deputy head teachers, and now we have 10 head teachers, actually, almost all in London. I think all of our heads are in London. So I think what's happened is you had some great leaders who had a vision for their school, needed additional talent to help. They had talent in their schools, but they needed additional talent to get it there. I think we helped provide some of the additional talent. And then a lot of our people have now helped become part of that ecosystem with other great teachers and other great leaders who really have high expectations for the kids, high expectations for the schools, and have constantly been raising the standards of what's expected, I think.
I'm gonna come out to you guys in a little while to ask questions. So as you're having your dessert, you can think about questions that you'd like to put to Brett. Brett mentioned the scheme called London Challenge, which is seen as really influential alongside Teach First in London at bringing schools together and sharing good practice, sharing leadership across the city and creating a sense of joint identity, communal identity in London. And one of the things at City Hall under Boris Johnson that we've been developing is the successor to London Challenge, a version of London Challenge which is about supporting ongoing peer-to-peer mentoring, teaching, training, working not only with just schools, but with state schools, with independent schools, with universities, with business, to try and create that sense of shared mission and to bring even more expertise into the education sector. On that point about people from outside the education sector, Brett, I just wanted to ask you about your views on the role of business in all this. That's been one of the themes throughout this whole conference. What do you think business has done in relation to Teach First, and what can it do still in London?
Yeah, so it's been crucial for us. We've been a business. In some ways, we were created from the business world, I'd say almost from the beginning, in partnership with lots of other sectors. But Teach First, we always see ourselves as a very collaborative organization that basically this is a national problem and everyone has to solve it together. The advantage London has for the rest of the country is a lot of businesses are headquartered in London. So the way we use our business support, first is through funding. So obviously we're a charity. We need money to run, so we get a lot of wonderful financial support from many, many businesses in London. But also there's other ways we get businesses involved in schools. All of our teachers do a summer project in the business world. Businesses provide coaches for our teachers. They provide leadership training for our teachers. We're doing great stuff with people like Goldman Sachs and Procter & Gamble and McKinsey and others who are providing some of the leadership training for our teachers. So the way we want is to tie it all together. And then what we've seen is some of our partnerships, like with a Deloitte or a PricewaterhouseCoopers or Accenture, a lot of our alumni end up working for those companies. So maybe about 20% of our alumni go work in business. Most of them stay involved in education, but about 20% work for big businesses. And what's great is those who get involved in businesses, almost all of them stay involved in our mission by getting their business involved in schools. So Deloitte, we have this fantastic partnership where Deloitte works with our alumni and with our teachers to find different ways that they can support Teach First in different schools around the country now, and we're moving that outside London. Accenture is a great example where they have about 40 people working at Accenture who did the Teach First program. So they have quite a lot of our alumni working for them. And the Teach First alumni started something called the Teach First Club. And I just spoke to the CEO of Accenture in the UK who said it's the most popular club in the company. Almost everyone's a member of this club now. And what the club does is it gets Accenture employees to volunteer in Teach First schools and low-income schools. And it gets them to provide interview training and resume training for the children in these schools and different mentoring. So the whole idea is, how do we do back and forth support between businesses and schools, and hopefully our teachers and others can help break down any barriers that might exist.
Well, one of the aspects of Teach First, which is interesting, is the emphasis you place on leadership. So the traditional teacher training route in the UK is a university education, a university course for about 2 years or a year, a lot of emphasis on academic, educational theory, plus work placement, so the opportunity to work in a school and to try looking after a class of children, getting used to that idea. But you have a number of additional aspects which are about management, leadership, so the kinds of qualities you would need to run a successful school. But do you think that there is a risk that school and teaching is seen as a management exercise and essentially, managing kids in a classroom, and the educational, the intellectual focus and the academic and theoretical side of traditional teacher training is lost in Teach First?
I mean, so it's a balance, I think. So the first thing is we see classroom teaching, the way we describe classroom teaching is as a leadership exercise, like you said. And we're very non-apologetic that to be a great teacher, you need to be a leader. You need to lead your children from point A to point B. You don't have any excuses for being a great leader. You don't give up. It's everything, all the things about great leadership is great teaching. But to do it, you need lots of pedagogical skills. There's certain things you need to know how to do. If you're a football coach, you need to know the rules of football. You need to know certain coaching techniques. Similarly, teaching, you need to know certain things. So all of our teachers get a postgraduate certificate of education and work towards a master's in education. And we work with schools of education to ensure that they have really good pedagogical knowledge and they have that background and they get a lot of support with that. But beyond that, we work with them on thinking about it as a leadership problem every single day they're in the classroom. So one of the things, we do a lot of adaptive leadership training where the whole thought is, all right, if you want children to succeed and you've tried 8 different things, you need to try a 9th thing if the first 8 have failed, You need to constantly be thinking ways you can solve problems in lots of different ways. And that's what we see as great teaching. But we then need to give them the tools to have the different teaching tools that they can use to try those 9 different ways.
Can I ask you a pointed question about teacher training in the UK? If you were rung up tomorrow morning by Michael Gove, the Secretary of State for Education, he said, Brett, I'm going to put you in charge of teacher training in universities in the UK. What single thing would you change about the way the traditional form of teacher training works?
And in England, there's a huge revolution happening in teacher training currently. So people who don't know, in Britain, in England, Michael Gove is radically transforming teacher training, I'd imagine almost more than anywhere in the world. And I think there's all sorts of ways he's making it much more school-based and everything. The thing that I think is really important is there's not enough, teacher training isn't values-based enough, or it doesn't have a strong ethos enough. So I always think anyone who does teacher training, they should see it as they should have strong ethos about what they're trying to achieve. They need to have strong values. They need to help train people for making change happen. And have that mindset. And I've seen some schools of education do it really well, actually, and they've moved in that direction in the last few years. I was just at Sheffield Hallam, and I was really excited to see, that's just one university, they're really thinking about teacher training in a very values-based way, in a very what their ethos is about teacher training, what they want teachers to achieve, and I think that's brilliant. I think some of the less effective teacher training programs kind of just see themselves churning out almost practitioners rather than thinking about what do they want these practitioners to achieve, actually. So I think that might be a difference.
Okay, I'm going to come out and see if anybody has any questions to put to Brett. I can see one hand already. Would you mind just introducing yourself as well?
Yes, my name is Wigdortz, and
Sorry, do you mind just waiting for the microphone? Do you mind just repeating
Yes. Sorry, is
who
it on?
you are so that
Is it
everybody
on?
else can hear? Yeah.
It is, yes. No, my name is Lord Alan Watson, and I'm High Steward of Cambridge University, and I'm speaking later on this afternoon about student entry into Cambridge. One of our frustrations is that we don't receive nearly as many applications from the state sector as we would hope for youngsters who can come into Cambridge. Now, of course, people are nervous about fees, but the truth is that it is certainly our aspiration that no young person who is qualified to get into Cambridge would be debarred by their socioeconomic position. This transformation that you've helped to carry out in London schools, which is quite remarkable, what is the knock-on effect of that in terms of the students' own aspirations, not the teachers' aspirations, now the students' aspirations? And are they beginning to, aim for the sky and really believe that they could get in if they applied?
Yeah, no, that's a question we're always talking about at Teach First too. I mean, so statistically, what you've seen is a lot more low-income children are going to university than before. That gap has been starting to reduce, but they're not going to the top universities. So actually, the gap of low-income kids going to top universities has been stagnant. I think there's a lot of myths out there, which our teachers talk about. But I think there's also a real problem where a lot of schools just don't expect their kids to go to top universities and don't even see it as an option. So, our teachers talk all the time about these really bright children they teach who just want to go to the local metropolitan university down the road because that's what they see. And, they would think of Cambridge as like a place where aliens might live with, 3 eyes and green faces, but not something that they would...
Not you, obviously, sir.
Not you, but, but just something they wouldn't assume, like it just wouldn't even be something they think about. About 5 years ago, we started a program called HEAPS, which we're changing the name because the name is awful, Higher Education Access Program for Schools. And the Higher Education Access Program for Schools, it's for this. Our teachers now, what they do is they identify 2 children in their class who come from low-income communities who should be going to Cambridge or other top unis. And then those guys get 18 months mentoring by some of our alumni. And probably James was were you a mentor of HEAPS? Yeah, so one of our HEAPS mentors is sitting back there. And then they do a residential Cambridge, actually, a 1-week residential Cambridge, and then they apply. And we've gotten really good results. And this past year, we found out a quarter of all the low-income kids going to Oxford or Cambridge have been through HEAPS, actually, which is an amazing stat, which is both good and bad. It means that we're sending some people to Oxford and Cambridge, but it also means the number of low-income kids going to Oxford and Cambridge are so low that we could make a big impact with a very few kids. So I think this is a big issue. I just think how to break down, our teachers all the time are trying to find different ways to break down that barrier, because so many of them went to a school like Cambridge and they see kids and they say that, they tell me, look, I have so many kids in my class who are so much smarter than the kids I went to university with, and they work so much harder than the kids I went to university with. I need to get them to go to those universities, but they're not seeing it, or they don't know how to apply, or they see barriers that are preventing them.
And another question, do you mind just passing the microphone, please? Thank you. And could you say
Thank
who
you very
are?
much. I am Tim Gopi Singh, the Minister of Education from Trinidad and Tobago. You touched on 2 areas which concerned myself and most of our Caribbean and Latin American neighbors. One is leadership of the principals of the schools, and the second is teachers training. Now, what type of leadership you looking at? Is it management leadership, or could you go a little more in detail what type of leadership you're looking for from the principals of these schools, and how do you get them trained in the leadership you're looking for? And then in the teachers training, you indicated that the postgraduate diplomas in teaching are important. What time of the academic year you allow these teachers to go for training, particularly in the environment of strong trade unionism, where you have to pay for almost everything, even during the holiday period for the teachers?
And actually, that's a very important question in terms of the kind of resistance you faced as well when Teach First was set up about, how you're changing the way in which teachers are trained.
Yeah. So this is about like head teachers who are skeptical about things. Or
So you were asking about the
First, the leadership training for the principals. You said your success has been basically part of it resides in the strong leadership of your principals, and they share their leadership skills.
Yes.
How do you get to that level?
Yeah. So you mean the head teachers who are part of this success?
and how do you train them when their holiday times are fairly restricted and trade
What
unions are very
what
hostile?
do you train
to
them in? Do you train them in management, or you train them in leadership skills, or what?
Right. So we run a program for our people called Teach On, which is to try to continue to work with our alumni to get them into successful senior leadership roles in schools. I think 10 years ago, there were a lot of changes which I would give people like, Tony Blair and Michael Barber and Andrew Donis and others credit for, where they did open up leadership in schools. And I think a head teacher in England now has a pretty good salary in London, and they have a lot of power, I think. They have more authority than in most countries to make changes happen in their schools. So I think the first thing is, I think to be a leader of a school, you need to have that authority. I think in many systems, head teachers don't have enough authority. They're more a management role rather than a leadership role. But then you need to get really talented people in there and get them really excited. I think in the beginning, the academy program helped a lot to get great leaders in Britain, in that the early academy program helped create schools with very strong ethos. And when you have schools with strong ethos, then...
Sorry, just to explain, the Academies program, for those of you who don't know, is a way of setting up and running schools which are not controlled by the local state. So these have a degree of freedom which other schools in the UK do not have, and that's been quite, as you say, instrumental in terms of building up the quality and the capacity of the head teachers.
Yeah, right. Yeah, sorry. So I think that, and often they had a business sponsor or another sponsor. And I think they were able to attract some really good leaders who wanted to be heads of that school, who bought into the ethos and saw that they were able to make change happen. What we find with our teachers and other leaders, they often are pretty happy to use their holidays to do lots of training. And, we do something called Super Saturday, where every month or 6 weeks, our teachers come together on a Saturday. And we started thinking, gosh, they're not going to want to do this. They're exhausted after a week. But actually, they love it, and they always want more of it because, coming together energizes them so much. I think with unions and others, broadly, I think in some ways London was in such a bad state 10 years ago. People almost were open to change. In some ways, it's kind of good to hit rock bottom because I think it was easier to make change happen, because people just all sort of knew that it wasn't in a good situation. So I think that opened up people to being open to new things.
And also Teach First now has cross-party political support, so none of the major parties, or even the minor parties, object to Teach First, and the teaching unions have now accepted it as part of the landscape in London and in Britain.
We have good relations with the teaching unions. All of our teachers get qualified, they all become, they go through the full qualification, their paying conditions the same as other teachers, and overall the teaching unions are supportive.
Can I ask if there are any other questions? Yes, there's a lady at the back. Do you mind just waiting for the microphone to come to you? Oh, the microphone is... Do you mind passing one of the microphones? The lady with the grey jacket. Thank you.
Okay. My name is Kumbi Wurola, and I run an organization called Junior Achievement in Nigeria, called Young Enterprise in the UK. And I've been very interested in Teach for All, Teach First. And I'm hoping to be in UK next, in April for the immersion program because we're thinking of starting this in Nigeria.
Oh, brilliant.
When you were talking, you mentioned something about developing countries, and I've realized that a lot of developing countries are yet to get into the Teach First model, except when you look at India, that has a population just like Nigeria. My question now is this. when you have this super dynamic young group of people who start teaching, who go into schools, how do you marry that with existing teachers in the school? How do you resolve conflicts? Because the existing teachers don't have the regular training that the Teach for All model has, and you find that the students who undergo training from the Teach First teachers might outperform. So how do you manage that? Because I see a lot of conflict.
Yeah.
The second question to that is this.
Yeah.
In countries like Nigeria, developing countries, you might find that a lot of people might want to get into the Teach First model because they can't find a job out there. So how do you assess and be sure that those who come into your program are those who are truly passionate to make change agents out of their students who want to become leaders? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Those are two very strong, very good questions. I'm going to give you, Brett, a couple of minutes just to reflect on that and take another question so that we can squeeze more people in. There's a lady there. Do you have a microphone now?
Yes.
Would you like to ask your question now?
Actually, it's a continuation of that last question in terms of, it's the choice of the word teach first. I mean, are you supposing they'll move on to teach somewhere else, or they're not going to teach anymore? And what is the percentage of, do you retain the teachers after 2 years? You know,
Okay.
Okay, Brett, go ahead.
Okay, great. So yeah, first of all, it'd be great to talk because I think now there's programs in over 30 countries, but in Africa, the only program's in South Africa now. And I think, I always think seeing it work in places like Bangladesh and Pakistan and Nepal, I really think, a lot of African countries, this would be a great program to get, your country's great leaders focused on this issue. So the first thing I'd say, assessing. So we assess our teachers. We do a very rigorous assessment criteria. Even like Cambridge, we would only accept much less than half. I think maybe we accept maybe a third of Cambridge graduates, which means we reject 2/3 of Cambridge graduates. We would, we only accept a very small percentage of applicants. We look for good academics, but more importantly, we look for 8 competencies that we think you need to be a great teacher. So we look for things like respect and humility is one thing, which also hopefully goes to your second question. We look for leadership skills, we look for communication skills, we look for self-evaluation skills. So we run a very, I think, sophisticated selection day where people have to do online tools, and then they have to do group exercises and teaching, mock teaching and interviews. And with it all, we try to get a picture of these 8 competencies. So, I mean, I could talk more about it, but that's sort of what we try to build up as a feeling of their full leadership potential in the classroom and in society. For how they get along with other teachers, to me, it's always been important from the beginning that this isn't a program fighting other teachers or anything like that, because that would that would be so counterproductive. And we definitely come from the belief that most teachers in schools are working very hard, doing great things, really believing in the kids. So from the start, we always want to figure out how do we make this a really collaborative organization where we're providing additional resources for schools who then work with other people in the schools to together improve the system. I think, first of all, we try to select people who are very humble and collaborative. We look for it. We reject some people who would make great investment bankers, maybe, but just would be awful teachers in a low-income school. Just to use one example. We also, though, our training is very collaborative. So all of our teachers get a mentor within the school who's an experienced teacher in the school who is like a partner of theirs. We always want the head teacher to sign up for this and get their staff involved. So we only go in schools where the senior team ask us to be there. We don't want to put our teacher in a place where they're not welcomed. They need to be integrated part of the community. And then, I mean, just constantly we're trying to find ways that, this is everyone working together. And that's definitely the messaging we are always giving. So I think broadly, we don't normally have a problem, especially after the first year. Maybe the first year there's a bit of misapprehension or people are confused. But once people meet our teachers and work with them, and our teacher asks for help, and they see that our teachers get there very early in the morning, are working hard for kids, then normally everyone works very well together. That's the normal situation.
The second question, the third question was about teach first? Are they going
Yeah.
on to do other things? What's the retention rate?
Yeah, so I'll talk about the name and the retention rate. So our retention rate is comparable to other PGCE courses. So about 70% of our teachers stay a third year, are teaching for 3 years. Over 10 years, currently about 55% of our teachers are still teaching over 10 years, almost all in low-income schools. And another 15 or 20% are working in educational things like teacher training or an educational charity or what are other things, or Department of Education. So it's something about 75% are either teaching or working in an educational job, almost all in low-income communities. And of the other 25%, almost all of them are doing something, either mentoring or being a governor. You know, there's very, very few people we lose. Almost all of them stay involved with Teach First. The name, so originally the name was a few reasons. One, our biggest sponsor was London First. And so our original name was going to be Teach London First, and then we realized we wanted to cut out London. So that was just like one reason. But also, at the beginning, we were changing people's perception about teaching. So people's perception of teaching 12 years ago was you went into teaching if like you were sure your entire life you wanted to be a teacher, and it was like that's all you wanted to do. So we wanted right from the start to say to people, you know, just do this first, then see if you like it or not, and if you do, stay in it. If not, you could do something else, but stay involved in this mission. But this is the first thing you should do. And that was sort of part of our thinking behind the name. I mean, to be honest, like we were just talking about 12 years in, you know, it's not I actually would have chosen a much more bland name if I had to do it over again, because I worry people, it does sometimes give people that impression that this is like, do it first and then don't do it at all. I mean, the other thing is a large percentage of our intake are more experienced people now. So about 20% of our intake are over 30 now, over 30 years old. So, you know, I always worry Teach First makes people think everyone's very young right out of university when we have a bigger demographic now. So, you know, I don't know if the name stuck with us too much. Yeah.
Well, it's a name that a lot of people know in the UK, so
Yeah.
you don't lose it now. We are pretty much out of time, but thank you for your questions. If you have any more burning questions for Brett, I think he is going to be able to stick around just for a few minutes afterwards. And he also has a book out called Success Against the Odds, and there are about 40 copies of this book available for people if you want to take away a copy. They are being given away, but can I ask that if you come from a private organization and you can make a donation to Teach First in return for a copy of this book, it would be hugely appreciated. Can I ask you one final question? Obviously, this is a long book. You can't, not that long, actually. You could read it fairly quickly on the plane back. But if there's one lesson about your experience with Teach First, about setting up something in a very challenging situation that you can share with everyone here, what's the one thing that you would say to people?
Yeah, I mean, so the one thing I'd say is, you know, don't give up. I mean, that sounds obvious, but I think there was something about being very naive that was very helpful, because I think there were a lot of experts at that point who were saying this wouldn't work for lots of reasons. So, you know, there's always an advantage. Hopefully some people here are entrepreneurs and different things, and, you know, just be very naive, don't give up, you know, have a vision, just stick to it, and a lot of times experts who think it won't work aren't necessarily correct. So, you know, change can happen, I'll say that. And yeah, I would say if you can, on our Teach First website, it's teachfirst.org.uk. There's a button, Donate Now, and we are a charity, so if you do take the book, if you can make a donation, I think we take PayPal and credit cards, so you can pay for the book by making a donation to Teach First. I'd appreciate it.
Brett, thank you very much. It's been really inspiring. Thank you. Thanks for all your questions.